All right, so today we're going to be diving into some pretty crazy stuff.
Yeah,
We're talking about the President of the United States, talking about expanding U.S. territory.
right.
And, I mean, and not just a little bit. We're talking Canada,
Oh, wow.
Greenland,
Mm,
Panama Canal,
wow.
even Gaza.
It's a pretty wild collection of places.
It is. And the world is kind of reacting with a shrug.
Yeah, you'd think that like pronouncements like this would send
Yeah.
shockwaves across the globe, but it's just kind of like,
It's like a collective, huh?
yeah.
It's really interesting. So to unpack all
Mm,
this, we've got this really interesting article from The Independent
great source.
called Donald Trump Has Imperial Ambitions. Why Won't Anyone Take Him Seriously?
Yeah, a great title. And it really kind of gets to the heart of it.
Yeah.
Like, what does it mean to have like imperial ambitions in the 21st century?
Right.
And why isn't the world taking these pronouncements seriously?
Right. So let's start by laying out exactly what he's said about these territories.
Yeah, so, I mean, on Canada, he's floated the idea of them becoming the 51st state.
Wow.
Now, this isn't the first time that a U.S. president has, talked about annexing Canada,
Right.
but it's definitely unusual.
Yeah, in modern times for sure.
Yeah.
And Greenland, what's the story there?
He's expressed interest in purchasing Greenland from Denmark.
Hmm.
Now, Greenland has a lot of strategic importance,
Right.
especially as the Arctic region is becoming more accessible
Right.
due to climate change.
So there's like a geopolitical strategy behind that one, maybe?
Yeah, potentially. Or maybe it's more about resources.
Okay.
Greenland has significant mineral deposits,
Uh-huh.
but the article doesn't really give us a clear answer on his motivations.
Okay, so now we're in North America,
Yeah.
Europe, then there's the Panama Canal.
Oh, yeah.
Didn't we hand that over in 1999?
That's right.
Back to Panama.
Yeah. He's made comments suggesting that he wants to regain control of it,
Really?
citing its importance for global trade and things like that.
So now we're in Central America. What is the pattern here?
Well, that's the thing, is it's really hard to say. There's no clear,
Yeah.
through line.
Yeah.
But then we get to, the most surprising one of all, Gaza.
Gaza.
Yeah.
Why would he even be interested in Gaza?
Well, the article points out that he's talked about the potential for turning Gaza into the Riviera of the Middle East,
What?
suggesting that he sees, economic potential there.
Wow.
Of course, the reality on the ground is far more complex,
Right.
given the ongoing conflict and humanitarian crisis.
I'm a whole other layer to this.
Yeah, and it's one of the things that makes this whole situation so difficult to decipher.
Right.
Is he really interested in annexing these territories
Right.
for strategic or economic reasons? Or is it something else entirely?
Yeah, the article seems to suggest that his why is a bit of a mystery.
Yeah.
It even says that maybe there isn't a grand strategy,
Mm-mm.
that maybe we should be looking at his personality
Uh.
and his past behavior for clues.
Right. The article speculates that some of his motivations might stem from this desire to project strength and dominance on the world stage.
Which would fit with his admiration for certain strongman leaders.
Exactly.
Yeah,
The article specifically mentions his admiration for Putin,
right.
who is, of course, annexed Crimea and engaged in other kind of expansionist moves.
So maybe he sees that as a model for asserting American power.
It's possible.
But then there's this whole America First angle. He
Yeah.
campaigned on pulling back from global entanglements.
Exactly.
It's a paradox.
It is a paradox.
Yeah.
His America First rhetoric seemed to be all about isolationism.
Right.
But now we have these pronouncements about expanding American control across the globe.
It's like the two ideas are at odds with each other.
Yeah.
Completely.
And that's what makes the global reaction so interesting.
Or lack thereof.
Or lack thereof. Other countries seem to be struggling to figure out if he's serious or if this is all just bluster.
It's like, if Putin was making these kinds of statements, the world would be freaking out.
Without a doubt.
We'd be seeing emergency meetings at the UN condemnations, maybe even threats of sanctions.
For sure.
But with Trump, there's a much more muted response.
Yeah.
It's like the world is holding its breath and waiting to see what he'll do next.
And that uncertainty seems to be playing right into his hands.
So we've got this really unusual situation.
They do.
A U.S. president making pronouncements about territorial expansion.
Yeah.
And the world doesn't know how to take him.
Right.
What does all of this mean? Where do we even begin to unpack this?
Well, the article offers a few possible explanations,
Okay.
but it also raises a lot more questions, I think.
Right.
One of the things that it points to is Trump's history of using bravado and exaggeration as a negotiation tactic.
Mm-hmm.
You remember his threats of tariffs on Canada and Mexico.
Oh, yeah. Those went away pretty quickly.
Yeah, they went away pretty quickly once you felt like you'd gotten some concessions.
Right.
So is that what we're seeing here? Is this all just a big negotiation?
The article references his book, The Art of the Deal,
Right.
where he talks about this very thing.
Yeah, using outrageous claims to kind of get what you want.
So maybe these pronouncements about annexation are just meant to throw everyone off balance.
Possibly.
But then what does he actually want? What's the end game?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think that's what makes this whole situation so unsettling for the rest of the world.
Yeah.
It's like he's playing this high-stakes game of poker,
Right.
but nobody else knows the rules.
Yeah. And stakes are high.
Incredibly high. Yeah, we're talking about like potential shifts in global power dynamics,
Right.
the redrawing of maps, the possibility of conflict.
Right. And, it's interesting because the article seems to suggest that maybe his motivations are unclear.
Yeah.
It even says that maybe there isn't like a grand strategy behind all this, that maybe it's more about personality
Okay.
than policy.
Well, it's certainly tempting to try to psychoanalyze a world leader, especially one as unconventional as Trump.
Right.
But I think it's important to be cautious about jumping to conclusions.
Okay, so what would be like a more productive way
Right.
to think about this?
I think we need to consider the possibility that his pronouncements are driven by a combination of factors.
Okay.
A genuine belief in American exceptionalism,
Okay.
a desire to kind of shake things up on the global stage, and yes, maybe even a need for attention.
Let's break that down.
Yeah.
What do you mean by a genuine belief in American exceptionalism?
Well, there's this long tradition in American foreign policy of seeing the U.S. as having this like unique role in the world.
Right.
It's a kind of moral authority.
Right.
And for some people, that translates into this belief that the U.S. has a right, even a duty to kind of expand its influence.
So maybe Trump is tapping into that sentiment,
Yeah.
trying to reassert American dominance in a world that seems to be challenging that dominance more and more.
That's one way to look at it.
Okay.
But then there's also the shake things up factor.
Yeah. Okay.
Remember, Trump came to power promising to disrupt the status quo,
Right.
to overturn the old ways of doing things.
And making these kinds of pronouncements certainly gets people's attention.
Exactly. It creates chaos, uncertainty.
Right.
And in that chaos, he sees an opportunity to reshape the world order to his liking.
But if that's the case,
Yeah.
wouldn't it make more sense for him to have a clear plan?
Yeah.
Like, these pronouncements just seem so random,
Yeah.
so disconnected.
Well, maybe that's part of the strategy.
Okay.
By keeping everyone guessing,
Yeah.
by constantly shifting the goalposts.
Yeah.
He makes it difficult for other countries to anticipate his next move.
It's like he's playing 3D chess while everyone else is playing checkers.
Right.
Yeah.
And that unpredictability could be a powerful tool.
Right.
It keeps his opponents off balance.
So we've got American exceptionalism,
Yeah.
the desire to shake things up,
Right.
and then this strategic use of unpredictability.
Yeah.
But you also mentioned this need for attention
Right.
as a possible motivator.
Right. And I know that might sound a bit simplistic,
Yeah.
but I think it's important to remember that Trump is a master showman.
Right.
He understands the power of spectacle,
Yeah.
of creating a narrative that keeps him at the center of attention.
And these pronouncements about annexations certainly create a spectacle.
They do. They generate headlines. They spark debate. They keep people talking about him.
Exactly. And whether he actually intends to follow through on any of them is almost beside the point.
Right.
The goal is to just keep the spotlight on him.
Yeah, to maintain a sense of momentum, of being in control.
Right. It's like he's saying, look at me, world. I'm the one who can still make things happen,
Exactly.
even if those things seem crazy.
And in a world that often feels chaotic and unpredictable, that kind of assertiveness, even if it's based on bluster,
Right.
can be strangely appealing to some.
So we've got this really complex mix of possible motivations,
We do.
ideology,
Yeah.
strategy,
Mm-hmm.
ego.
Right.
How does all of this actually play out in the real world, though?
Right.
What are the potential consequences of these pronouncements,
Right.
even if they're never acted upon?
Well, I think one of the most significant consequences is this erosion of trust in the U.S.
Right.
as a reliable partner on the global stage.
Because if other countries can't be sure whether the U.S. is serious about its commitments,
Yeah.
or if it might just suddenly change course based on like the whims of its leader,
Right.
that makes it really hard to build those meaningful relationships.
Exactly. And that has implications for everything from trade agreements
Yeah.
to security alliances.
It's like the foundation of international cooperation is being chipped away at.
Yeah. And that's a dangerous trend.
Right.
Especially at a time when the world is facing some very serious challenges,
Right.
from climate change to pandemics to rising authoritarianism.
Yeah, it's interesting. The article mentions that if a leader like Putin was making these kinds of statements,
Right.
the reaction would be much stronger.
Yeah.
Why do you think the world is responding to Trump so differently?
I think there are a couple of reasons.
Okay.
First, there's this sense that for all his bluster,
Right.
Trump is ultimately constrained by the institutions of American democracy.
So even if he wanted to annex Greenland, for example,
Yeah.
he would face a lot of pushback from Congress, from the courts,
Right.
even from the American people.
And that's not necessarily the case with Putin, who has much more control over the levers of power in Russia.
Right. So maybe the world sees Trump as more of a bark than a bite.
Possibly.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there's also this kind of deeper issue at play here,
Okay.
which is that the world is still struggling to come to terms with the fact that the U.S. is no longer the undisputed global superpower that it once was.
So maybe these pronouncements about annexation, even if they're just bluster,
Yeah,
are a symptom of this larger decline
it's possible.
in American power and influence.
I think that's a very real possibility.
Wow.
And it's something that the U.S. and the rest of the world are going to have to grapple with in the coming years.
So much to process here.
Yeah.
We've got pronouncements that seem both outrageous and strangely compelling.
Right.
Motivations that are shrouded in mystery.
Mm-hmm.
A global reaction that's surprisingly muted.
Yeah. It's definitely a complex situation with no easy answers.
And the article doesn't really offer any easy answers either.
No.
But it does raise some really important questions, I think, about the nature of power.
Right.
The role of the U.S. in the world, the
Mm-hmm.
challenges of navigating this global landscape that's constantly shifting.
And I think those are questions worth pondering, even if we don't have all the answers right now.
It's like we're living in this time where nothing is quite what it seems.
Yeah.
We've got the President of the United States talking about territorial expansion, like it's some kind of real estate deal.
Right.
And the rest of the world is just trying to figure out, if he's playing a high-stakes game of poker,
Yeah.
or if this is just Trump being Trump.
Yeah. And I think that's the key takeaway here. The world is still struggling to understand how to deal with a leader who operates in such an unconventional way.
The article mentioned this idea of this Twilight Zone feeling.
Right.
It really does feel like we've stepped into some kind of alternate reality where the old rules don't apply anymore.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to have these conversations.
Right.
To try to make sense of what's happening.
Right.
To explore different perspectives.
Yeah.
And challenge our own assumptions.
Because if we don't, we risk being swept up in all the chaos in this constant stream of headlines and pronouncements without really understanding the deeper forces that are at play.
And those deeper forces are shaping the world around us, whether we're aware of them or not.
So as we're wrapping up this deep dive,
Okay.
let's go back to that question that the article poses.
Why?
Why won't anyone take him seriously?
Right.
What do you think is the answer to that?
Well, I think it's a combination of factors. There's this sense that Trump is often more interested in creating a spectacle than in actually implementing policies.
Right.
There's a skepticism about his ability to follow through on his pronouncements, given his history of making bold claims and then backing down.
Right.
And then there's this wariness, I think, a sense that the world has become somewhat desensitized to his rhetoric.
So maybe it's not so much that people don't take him seriously.
Right.
It's more that they've learned to kind of take him with a grain of salt.
Perhaps.
Yeah.
But I think there's also a danger in dismissing him entirely.
Right.
Even if his pronouncements are never acted upon,
Yeah.
they still have the power to shape perceptions,
Right.
to sow discord, to erode trust.
And that's why it's so crucial to stay informed,
Yeah.
to engage in critical thinking.
For sure.
And to really be aware of the potential consequences of his actions.
Right.
Both intended and unintended.
Absolutely.
Well, this deep dive has certainly given us a lot to think about. We've explored the potential motivations behind Trump's pronouncements.
Right.
The global reactions, or lack thereof.
Or lack thereof.
And then the broader implications for U.S. foreign policy.
For sure.
But, as always, we want to leave you with something to ponder,
Okay.
take away from this conversation.
I like it.
So here's a question to consider.
Okay.
If the world is no longer taking the U.S. at its word, if pronouncements about territorial expansion are met with shrugs rather than alarm,
Right.
what does that mean for the future of global order?
Wow.
What happens when the old rules no longer apply?
Yeah.
And a new set of rules has yet to be written.
That's a great question. It's a question that doesn't have an easy answer.
Right.
But it's a question worth asking.
Absolutely.
A question that should challenge us to think deeply about the world we're living in.
Yeah.
And the forces that are shaping our future.
And ultimately, the answers to those questions will depend not only on the actions of leaders like Trump, but also on the choices that each of us make, as citizens, as consumers, as members of a global community.
Well said.
That's it for our deep dive today.
Great deep dive.
Thanks for joining us on this journey of exploration and discovery.
Always a pleasure.
We'll be back soon with another fascinating topic.
Looking forward to it.
Until then, keep learning, keep questioning,
and
keep engaging with the world around you.